Hey guys, Freddy here. Welcome back to another House Rules video. And in this one I'm going to be covering sanity and mental instabilities and insanities and all that kind of thing. The sort of things which are generally in horror games, but are suited to the game we're writing together because it's based in hell. So there's a lot of horrible things which might affect people's sanity. But these similar damage effects where the character's affected without just doing hit point damage, you could use in things like a post-apocalyptic game, where instead of picking up sanity points or whatever you want to gauge them as, you'd be picking up radiation points. And instead of picking up mental instabilities, you'd be picking up mutations. You could easily take a very similar system where there's something that accumulates and leads to larger effects as the game goes on, across a variety of different games. But as I said, for the game that we're writing together, I'm going to use mental instabilities, and we will be looking at various games which cover that. Now, as usual, I'll be looking at a bunch of different games and how they handle this, and then I'll be going over to the computer desktop and having a look at the rules that I've put together for my game, or our game. Now, before I do that, I'd like to mention that this was all debated about on the Discord, which is linked to in the description down below, because I only had ideas for a couple more videos in this series, and I knew there were things that I'd missed. So I went onto the Discord and I asked your opinions and got feedback on this and a bunch of other things. So I think there's going to be about 5 more videos where in my mind I only had a couple left to do. So that's absolutely brilliant. After that, we're going to be going on to character creation videos, again debated to on the Discord channel, where I asked people what opinion on which series I should go on to, and that's what was suggested. So if you want to join in these conversations, try the Discord. Now, before I go on to anything else, I'd like to take a moment to talk about my patrons, who this week I have been advised are just lovely. And I cannot disagree with this, because they are lovely enough to help support me and this channel, and that's very much appreciated. Now, if you'd like to join them and help support the channel and see these videos a week early, then the Patreon's linked to in the description down below, and you can get access to it from there. But anyway, let's have a look at some games that deal with sanity. Now, when most people think about sanity in role-playing games, they're going to be thinking about Call of Cthulhu, because the game is pretty much completely built around the subject. You're far more likely to lose your character through loss of sanity and getting locked up for the various mental instabilities you picked up than you are through death. It's that kind of game. Now, the version I've got is 3rd edition, the version by Games Workshop and Chaosium, in the UK release. And you turn to page 28, and there's an entire section on sanity. Now, basically, sanity in Call of Cthulhu works by you have a sanity score, which is between 0 and 100. And when you see something horrible, from a dead body to a mythos creature, through to reading books which reveal the terrible state of the universe to you, you make a sanity roll, which is a D100. If you roll under your current sanity, then you take a lesser loss. Now, quite often this will be 0. You won't lose anything. But sometimes what you're seeing or finding out is so disturbing that you will still take sanity loss. If you fail the roll, then you'll take a higher amount. Now, for something fairly minor, this may be a single point, or it might be a considerable amount on a dice roll. And you lose the sanity, so you are more vulnerable to sanity tests in the future. Now, if you lose 5 or more points, you need to make an idea roll to realize the full significance of what you behold. If you succeed in that roll, then you lose sanity and you can pick up an insanity. Now, these can be temporary insanities, which can last you from combat rolls up to days. Or these can be full insanities, catatonia, amnesia, nectophobia. And the book has far more of these later on, because these are things that the Games Master picks out. This isn't a table you roll on. Now, the game has amounts here. When you lose 20% more of your current sanity in a single hour, you'll automatically go insane. The Games Master chooses appropriate infirmity from the insanity table. There's suggested losses, surprised by a corpse, witnessing grisly, bizarre occurrences, usually 1d10, etc. And there's ways of gaining it back. So as you become more skilled, and your control over the universe increases. You gain sanity when you defeat monsters, so you're aware that they can be beaten. You can gain it. You can go through psychoanalysis, and you can cure insanities through psychoanalysis. But that's basically how it works. You have a score between 0 and 100, which you roll against. So as you see horrible things, you are more likely to be affected worse the next time, because your score is getting lower and lower until your character goes out of play. And next up, a game I love to cover, Blood, the role-playing game of modern horror by Norley Tucker and Underground Games. Now this handles it in a fairly similar way to Call of Cthulhu, that you're making a roll, in this case a willpower roll, and you're losing willpower points. And when you reach 0 of these, then you start to pick up mental instabilities, which are dealt with on page 60. So we talk about how character lunacy happens, because before that it talks about how NPCs, that generally you'd be creating them, because rather than being an intellectual game of horror, like Call of Cthulhu, where there are monsters out there and it's the thought of that which is driving you insane, this is a role-playing game of slasher horror. So you are creating Michael Myers or Anthony Perkins' character out of Psycho, Norman Bates, or one of those, and you're picking up that kind of insanity. So we've got different things like catanoia, homicidal lunacy, hallucinatory lunacy, schizophrenia, sadomasochism, delusion, from thinking you're the king through to thinking that you are Superman or even God. Reverse sexuality, so you become a transvestite or a homosexual. The fact that it has those as mental illnesses are slightly dodgy, and we'll come on to that more in a bit, because this is a product of its time, let's be honest. We've also got compulsions, so kleptomania, alcoholism, nymphomania, and those. And we've got various phobias. You know, a phobia of foreigners, a phobia of the opposite sex, of worms. And you've got manic depression as well. Now, these are slasher type things. This is to make people into slasher horrors. You're trying to become Norman Bates. That's why transvestitism's in there. Even though treating that as a mental illness isn't very politically correct these days, it is incredibly on genre for a slasher horror film. Now, getting rid of these, there is no mention at all. Once you've got an insanity, that's it. How a madness or paranoia affect behavior of individual PC should be left largely to the player. Madness should not be the main concern of your players, because they're going to die in a horrible, gruesome way. Unlike Cthulhu, you're not going to go out due to your mental problems. You're going to go out because somebody sticks a big axe through your head. And next, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. Now this is 1st edition. And while this is a fantasy game, it is a fantasy game in a grim world of perilous adventure. Because the darker tone of Warhammer compared to most fantasy games actually uses sanity and that kind of thing against the players. Because while your Dungeons & Dragons characters won't see a pile of dead bodies and suddenly become agoraphobic, and it doesn't suit that kind of game, in Warhammer, the characters picking up flaws as horrible things happen to the characters and then becoming more twisted really, really suits the game. Now, sanity is dealt with, or insanity, on page 83 of 1st edition. And it details how you gain insanity points. If you get a critical hit served on you, so you take massive damage and you realize your own mortality. If you fail a terror test, if you take a deliriant poison, and there's other things. Basically, if you fail a cool test on seeing something absolutely horrific. The results of gaining insanity points, and the disorders you can pick up. Now, these are detailed out. You know, you've got agoraphobia, alcoholism, claustrophobia, catatonia, gluttony, hatred, heroic idiocy, introversion, mania, phobias, schizophrenia. And these are all broken down over the next pages, what game effects they have. And detailing them out, you know, your hatred. You can become subject to hatred against the opposite sex of your own race, a race selected by the games master, characters of friendly races but of a specific current career. So you might hate wizards or rogues, a specific type of animal or pet, a particular person, group, or religion. We've also got things here like phobias, schizophrenias, minor disorders, and then we go into how you can cure them. You can go into an asylum, you can get surgery. Basically, somebody can crack your head open to get rid of the bad bit, which is very Warhammer. Drug treatment, and magical and mystical cures. And as I said, these are disadvantages to the players for the horrible things their characters have gone through. And that very much suits the tone of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. It's a darker game where your characters are going to get destroyed through play. They're not going to hit a high level and become heroic kings or queens. They're going to be broken down characters at the end of play. Now, a game you probably wouldn't think of when you think of insanities and psychological disorders is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Other Strangeness by Palladium Games. Now, this is a very early edition because the insanities in here are very unpolitically correct and very not targeted at the younger audience that Turtles was targeted at later. But on page 15, we've got Insanities. Now, there is no sanity score. Basically, the Games Master is just encouraged that if the characters go through excessive trauma, such as long period of physical or mental torture, drug-induced hallucinations, witnessing an experience of shockingly grotesque atrocity, terrible, frightening, or unusual brush with death, witnessing terrible or shocking death of a deeply loved one, severe physical disability, or to cause accidental of several innocent people's deaths. They all roll on the insanity tables. Now, as I said, this is shockingly out of touch with our modern era, which you can't really expect of something which came out in the 80s. Because we've got sexual deviations in here, that homosexuality is a mental problem, as is on the same level as paedophilia, transvestitism, and necrophilia, being anti-sex, being a voyeur, a peeping Tom. These are all considered as the same level. We've also got various phobias, and we've got the cures. So affective cure or affective disorder and neurosis, through therapy and counselling, psychoses, phobias, how to deal with them, and the effects of alcoholism, and the effects of being drunk, withdrawal from that, the effects of drug addiction, because drug addiction is also something you can get through the trauma of seeing something shocking. Now, this is not an incredibly detailed system, but it can be kind of fun. But, as I said, this section was definitely altered for later editions. In fact, in some of these early editions, they produced a sticker and put it over that to cover it up. But there's some interesting ideas in there to throw in, but it's very much an add-on to the system. It's not a core part of it. And just to show you how things changed very quickly, we've got Rifts, which came out just a couple of years later. Now, if we turn to page 19, we've got basically exactly the same insanity section. You know, the Games Master applies insanities if you receive trauma from long periods of physical or mental torture, drug-induced hallucinations, witnessing or experiencing a shockingly grotesque atrocity, terrible, frightening, or unusual brush with death. All the same things. We've got virtually the same tables, except the sexual deviancies are gone. And it treats it in very much the same way. You know, got different phobias, obsessions, cures for insanity, effects of alcoholism, and all that. But once again, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, this is very much tacked on. It's not a core part of the game, but the rules are there if the Games Master wants to incorporate it into the game. But it's not like Call of Cthulhu, Blood, Warhammer, where you have an attribute to monitor how insane you're going. And finally, something much more modern, Twilight 2000 by Free League Publishing. Now, this is a modern game set after World War III, the role-playing in the World War III that never was. It comes in this lovely huge box, which is too big for camera. But I don't need that anyway, so I'll discard that, and I'll grab the player's manual. Now, everything's dealt with in here. Now, mental problems in Twilight 2000 aren't going to be down to you seeing eldritch horrors. They're not going to be down to you reading tomes of unknown knowledge. It's going to be down to stress in combat, being under fire by seeing people killed, that kind of thing. And it's dealt with using a system called stress. is dealt with on page 77. Stress. Stressful experiences, such as getting shot at or witnessing harrowing scenes, can temporarily put you out of action or even cause long-term psychological damage. You can suffer stress in several ways. These are the two most common. By pushing a skill roll. So, if you fail a skill roll, you can attempt to re-roll, but you'll gain stress because you are very tense about what's going on. You almost mucked up. You got the chance to roll again, but you are stressed by it. And from stressful situations. So, coolness under fire, those kind of things. Now, once your stress has gone up too much to beat the stress level your character is allowed to take, when you've suffered stress equal to an excess of your stress capacity, you're incapacitated by stress. You're paralyzed by fear or indecision and break down in despair. You can run for cover, but you can't perform any other action or roll for any skills. And you can rally from that. Somebody can encourage you, come on, fight back. And they get to make a command roll to order you back into combat. You automatically heal 1 point of remaining stress for each shift of spent resting or sleeping. So you lie around for a few days and you recover from the stress of combat. You can't go into battle again and again, or you'll start to pick up way too much stress and you will get mental traumas. Now, stress doesn't inflict critical injuries like damage does, but each time you become incapacitated by stress, you risk suffering a long-term mental trauma. And you roll on this table of mental problems. So we've got nervous tremble, you're anxious, you're sullen, you've got nightmares, you've got phobia, you've got alcoholism, paranoia, psychosis. And a number of these have game penalties. So if you've got nervous tremble, then your ranged combat and your driving is -1. If you're anxious, your recon and survival are -1. If you're sullen, your command and persuasion are -1. If you've got psychosis, you need to make an empathy roll, attribute only, in stressful situations. If you fail, you trigger a violent rampage. And that's how it works. You are receiving stress for being in combat, and the system is emulating the fact that your character cannot be in battle after battle after battle without suffering from that in the long term. If they are in the occasional firefight, then they'll be able to recover because they'll get night's rest. They'll be able to get cared for in that. But other than that, they're going to start to pick up problems because they've been in combat just too long. So here we are with the Google document of the rules that have been put together. Now, the version of Sanity I've put in here at the very end of the document, so we'll scroll down because there's not been a lot of changes. There are a bunch of stuff which needs to be done before this will be released, but they will be dealt with in future videos as we work finishing touches. Definitions of skills, etc. have to go in. But this is very much a first draft of a Sanity system, which I've used called Stress. Now, in a world where demons walk the streets, magic has warped reality, and everyone knows there is an eternity of torture ahead of them, people have extreme reactions to the extreme situations they are faced with. Stress is a gauge of how well they are dealing with it. When faced with an extremely stressful situation, such as finding a mutilated corpse, being confronted by a major demon, etc., the character must make a willpower test against the difficulty the game's master assigns. Suggested stress difficulties: low, which is a 1 success, being in life-threatening danger or finding a dead body. 2, moderate stress, being held helpless, being tortured, or finding a mutilated body. 3, which is high stress, being confronted with a major demon, seeing a friend die, witnessing human sacrifice. Or 4 is extremely high, a major demon tearing a friend apart. So you've got to make a willpower roll and get a number of successes equal to the stress level the Games Master assigned. She'll be rolling multiple dice and hoping to get 1 to 4 successes. If the character rolls more successes than stress difficulty, they suffer no stress. So as long as you match, if it's in being held in life-threatening danger and you need 1 success, and you roll 1 success, there's no stress. You've dealt with it fine. For each point you fail the stress test by, they gain 1 point of stress. Stress is recorded on a 0 to 10 scale, can be used against the character by the Games Master. So, you have to get 4 successes because there's a big demon who's just torn one of your friends apart. You roll your stress, you get 1 success. So, you only get 3 points of stress. The 4 is reduced to 3 by that 1 success. Now you have a stress level of 3. The Games Master can use that. They can determine when a stressful situation occurs, which might be as little as being pressured for time, being under fire, or being intimidated, and can either reduce the number of dice the character can roll on that test, So if you're rolling 5 dice to do something under fire, you're attacking that demon, and the Games Master decides to use it against you straight away. So you have 5 skill dice to roll. You will lose 3 of those, and you'll only be rolling 2 dice. Or, alternatively, they can increase the number of their opposition rolls against that character. So the demon is more effective against you because you are panicking because of the stress, and the Games Master can determine that. This may only be done once per game session, and reduces the character stress by 1 point every time it's done. So the Games Master can't keep using your stress against you, and when he does use it, it gets reduced. So you are getting through the stressful situations because you've had a panic attack, but you feel a bit better afterwards. Exceeding stress. A character may decide to reduce their stress at any point by selecting a mental instability. They roll on the table below table, adding their current stress level to the roll, gaining whichever instability they roll, and their stress is reduced to 0. If a stress level exceeds 10 points, they must roll immediately. So you roll 1d20, you add any stress points to reduce your stress to 0, so you can decide to have this early so you won't get a terrible effect, or you can roll it late. Because if you've got 10 points, then you're rolling a d20, you can perhaps get a 30. If you roll a critical failure, getting total mental collapse. But if you're just getting rid of 1 stress point, you decide to roll early, you could get something as mild as forgetfulness or mood swings to keep that stress at 0. You're unlikely to do that, but that's the play of the game, that you're going to decide when to get rid of the stress and how that changes your character. The higher level of stress you have, when you convert it, the more likely you are to get a massive effect. A psychotic break, split personalities, intrusive thoughts which will distract you at different points, distortion of reality. Now obviously all of these need fleshed out, they need a lot more details, but the titles give you an idea of what they are, and they are rated from very minor up to the maximum ones. Now, I don't imagine stress to be a core part of this game. I'm just adding it for the rule system. And I can see ways you would want to alter this. Perhaps on the mental instabilities table or for stress, depending how much demonic you are, you can handle these things better. Seeing a dead body when you are part demon because you are being influenced by the hellscape around you might be a very minor thing compared to an ordinary human. Or perhaps demons just don't get mental problems. Or perhaps you make it worse. I can see different ways that the world would affect this. But this is just a very basic system that I put on. Obviously it needs very much tuned. But anyway, I think I've been wittering on for long enough. I'll be returning to a House Rules video fairly soon, where we're going to go over other elements to finish off the game. And then we'll have playtest sessions, and we'll have tweaking of the rules based on the feedback from those playtest sessions before we finish off this series. But as I said, I've wittered on for long enough, so thank you very much for watching. But as always, most of all, you look after yourselves, and I'll catch you later. Bye now.